transition from 2019 to 2020 was an exciting one. We had finally arrived in a new decade. How would this new era differ from those that came before it? Would the world shift to become a better place, or would it falter and crumble and ensure its destruction? From older generations already wise in the world to the youth just starting to realize their dreams, absolutely no one would be fully prepared for what came next.
The US airstrike has killed Iran's most important military commander.
100 fires burning in New South Wales alone, barely half of them are contained.
Its worst single-day loss ever.
A heat wave expected to push temperatures over 100.
The panic of purchasing toilet paper has reached a new low.
Good for the consumer, gasoline prices coming down.
And flames over 200 feet high.
A Japanese giant hornet.
The cataclysmic start of the decade brought with it a slew of unforeseen events that would come to influence significantly the state of the world. The most notable among these is the now ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which, as of the time of this recording, has reached over 5 million infections, resulting in over 300,000 deaths. Despite the nature of this virus being so widespread to the point that it affects everyone, its effects on everyone are not the same, and these differences are made clear when you look at the pandemic from an economic and cultural perspective.
Even if we are only to take a glance at the effects of the pandemic, it is evident that the scale of the problems being created is unequal between individuals. In everyday life, those higher on the socioeconomic ladder have it much easier than the people on the low end, and the recent events of this year have only helped to justify that fact. The inconveniences of the upper class that the pandemic is causing is incomparable to the flood of struggles that the lower class is drowning in.
You see, lower class jobs tend to be either entry level and therefore don't pay a living wage, or blue collar, meaning that their duties are relatively hands-on and therefore are done in person. Consequently, taking time off work to get tested is not an option for them. Without proof of testing, they are unable to work, and without work, they are unable to pay for testing, and they're thrust into a pretty vicious cycle. In many cases, those who are most at risk if state openings prove premature are not CEOs, governors, or a leading member of the Trump empire whisked to work by the Secret Service in armored SUVs. They are lower paid workers, minorities, and manual laborers who cannot log onto a laptop for 8 hours a day in their living rooms and are therefore exposed when they go back on the job.
Even then, companies that employ these workers are collapsing as well. Many of them are small businesses without contingency plans for such sudden and drastic economic downturns. They aren't getting enough income due to the rules that have been set up for the quarantine. For example, dine-in restaurants are unable to get customers, and several either already have or are going bankrupt for the lack of business. As such, they can hardly provide enough for themselves and surely not enough for their employees.
That number is it generally a starter job?
She is a starting employee. She has a 6-year-old child.
Okay,
This is her first job.
And you can get those jobs at a high school, and she may have my job one day. So
She may, but Mr. Diamond, she doesn't have the ability right now to spend your $31 million.
I'm always sympathetic.
She's short 567. What would you suggest she do?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Would you recommend that she take out a JP Morgan Chase credit card and run a deficit?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Would you recommend that she overdraft at your bank and be charged overdraft fees?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
So I know you have a lot
I'd love to call up and have a conversation about her financial affairs and see if we can be helpful.
See if you can find a way for her to live on less than the minimum that I've described.
Just be helpful.
Well, I appreciate your desire to be helpful, but what I'd like you to do is provide a way for families to make ends meet.
This was during a stable economy, and the worker in question made more than double the federal minimum wage. So in this time of just economic chaos, not being able to pay for your basic necessities is even more negative, more painful, more weighted. than it's ever been. On the contrary, the upper class, or the 1%, have had very few issues, if any. In fact, these people readily have access to coronavirus testing, which is all but unknown to those on the bottom half of the ladder. The people that are rich enough don't have to come into contact with any other people. For the most, their job can be done over the phone or computer or from the comfort of their own home or yacht or wherever they may be. And being completely honest, for quite a few of them, there isn't a need to work at all. Them being financially stable enough to subsist on reserves rather than rely on a flow of income. Their greatest benefit as the upper class lies in their propensity to be alone with ease, and their sole detractor is that feeling of loneliness.
Meanwhile, the changes in the middle class vary quite a lot. It honestly depends on each job each family or household has. The negative effects which the middle class see largely take the form of repeated annoyances. Rather than have their immediate well-being threatened by the state of the world, those in the middle class are far more likely to be disturbed by the social isolation. As they do not have the conveniences of the upper class, nor are they distracted by the problems of the lower class, it is also those of the middle class that are generally creating the most panic. For example, all of those people that are overstocking on supplies and causing stores to go dry for literally days, making it nearly impossible for the people that actually need those supplies to get them. Yes, I am a senior this year. I've been holding out okay. You know, my family is middle class. My dad has a convenient job where he's able to work from home, and my mom is a teacher, so she has been giving out her lesson plans from home as well. I wouldn't exactly say positive, but it hasn't been that bad. It definitely is an inconvenience. There's a lot of stuff that we wanted to do, especially since, you know, it's senior year. Everyone wants to do something after that. My dad wanted to go traveling a little bit, maybe visit the Grand Canyon, but everything is closed down now. It's hard to get groceries now. Can't even go out to get a haircut. Yeah, of course. It could definitely be worse. I mean, for a lot of people, it is much worse. You could consider us some of the lucky people. If it were up to me about the decisions that are being made, I actually wouldn't change much because I don't really think there is a better way to go about this. The pandemic is obviously like a real problem, so they shut everything down to try and keep people safe. Of course, there is no best solution, otherwise you'd already be doing it. But there are problems with it. The economy's tanking a bit, people are losing jobs, but I think we just have to hold out until it's over. Oh, of course. I mean, like, if you go and look at what Bill Gates said a while ago, I mean, like, we knew about this way ahead of time. Like, it was December when we had first discovered it. We should have taken action sometime in January. And basically we would have done the same exact thing we're doing now, and that way we would have probably been over with it by now. Really just like try to follow the rules as best you can that your state or country has set out for you, and just stay healthy, don't infect other people. That's really all we could do. Yeah, of course.
Because of America's culture, the government was very reluctant to place restrictions on the public. A culture which is largely centered on freedom and liberty was unprepared to sacrifice these ideals, even temporarily, in its mission to prevent the spread of the virus. One's culture is the greatest factor for how people choose to act against the pandemic, because when it comes to culture, a group's beliefs, values, and history will always influence their decisions. When the novel coronavirus hit South Africa in early March, the country launched one of the most vigorous public health responses in the world. What has informed South Africa's COVID-19 response? This is their third major pandemic or epidemic of this kind to hit the southern tip of Africa in just over 100 years. During the 1918-1919 influenza pandemic, which claimed an estimated 50 million lives globally, South Africa had the fourth highest mortality rate in the world. During the second wave of that pandemic, an estimated 6% of that country's population were wiped out.
When it comes down to it, the way different cultures reacted was almost entirely dictated by prior experiences and their vicinity from the origin. The places that were closer to the epicenter of the outbreak failed to react accordingly to the situation. Others who are farther away took it too lightly and are now suffering the consequences of their decision. Even places like South Africa that had already seen this type of calamity happen before and took immediate action were still met with an onslaught of other side effects.
There are also serious problems with South Africa's approach. The economic freeze has increased hunger and hardship, and the state has let loose the army and police with few restrictions. The United Nations named South Africa as one of the countries with the worst cases of police brutality during the global lockdowns. With all of this going on, one has to wonder, is history doomed to repeat itself?
For nearly a millennium, we've had a major pandemic every 100 years. Despite this pattern, can we truly say we've learned from our mistakes? During the Spanish flu, there was an attempt to reopen the economy because of the number of cases began to decline. This fatal error caused a resurgence of infections, and it ended up causing more damage than if they had just waited.
Yes, there were, in the past, various pandemics and other catastrophic events that decimated populations, but even then, like now, the most significant effects were made apparent in the differences in cultures and the impact on individuals due to social standing, or lack thereof. The people of Italy tried to act as an example for us after realizing their own mistake. Their hospitals were filled, and as a result, lots of people died who were unable to receive care. This is just one item on the long list of consequences that have come from the COVID-19 pandemic. The year of 2020 will definitely be remembered. Whether this is good or bad, only time will tell. Nearly everyone's lives have been affected in so many ways and in so many places across the globe. However, the things that will stand out the most after all this is the way different people were affected by the pandemic. The old and the young, the rich and the poor, and the different countries all over the world. Let this serve as a friendly reminder to always be conscious of the possibilities. It is important that as a people, we must all take part in helping to get through these very unfortunate times.
As the crowds begin complaining how the Beaujolais is raining, down on darkened meetings on the Champs-Elysees,